Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is part one of the making of Fireflies, where I will cover the arrangement and the elements. We'll kind of look at all the individual things that are happening, and boy, are there ever a lot of individual things happening in this song. So I was actually supposed to do this before Truck Puncher, but I could have sworn that Truck Puncher was the third or fourth track. I forget. I'm all kinds of screwed up, but that's okay because I'm doing it now. So, if you haven't listened to this song, the original playthrough video is linked in the description. If you want to check that out, you can do that. So, in the very beginning of this song, we have pianos. And this piano is East-West Pianos. And this is the Bosendorfer, however you pronounce it. And boy, do I love this thing. I use it a lot. It's just so... it sounds so good. I like it. I'm not even using velocity sensitivity on my keyboard, so it's like the same sensitivity, by the way. Oh, it's just so good. So there's that. I have it going through a whole bunch of things. We'll talk about that when we get to the sound design. But for the most part, it's just a piano library. Happens to be what I think to be the best piano library, but it's a piano library. For kind of what I use it for, you could probably accomplish this with normal, like, contact pianos. This might not sound as cool, but, you know, you can do it still. It's kind of a reasonable thing to do. And it does its thing for a while, and then it just goes straight into stuff. So, this track's thing, when I was making it, was that I was using Break Tweaker. Break Tweaker is a plugin made by BT and sold by Isotope. Its whole purpose is that it's basically a drum loop. It has its own little sequencer thing, and it can do a lot of really crazy stuff. And one of its primary thing is like stuff like this business, which is muted because I have a filter. But it basically has a little tiny little stutter edits that you can apply independently and differently on individual like little note moments. And the way you trigger it is that you have it's a generator, and then each little sequence is its own little like pattern essentially, and then the notes become like pattern blocks if you remember that from FL Studio. And then like this pattern, for example, triggers three different, one of them twice, sequences, and that's how the main drums are handled throughout this track. However, I started talking about it now because all these little tiny little things that are in here are stuff. There are samples and sounds that I put into Break Tweaker, and I screwed with them. I treated it like it was stutter edit in that case, in that particular moment. There are also a couple of things like this guy. This is a sample actually just straight out of Leviathan. In Leviathan, you go to the pack. You go to snares, and then there's shifted, and there's a whole bunch of those. This one in particular is that one, and that's a lot. Those are a lot of fun. So I just use that as like a little sweep thing in there. And there's a lot of other like just kind of stuff happening that got break tweaked, and just kind of strewed about. And they're useful for like, fill moments, that kind of thing. But then later I also used them as Foley elements to kind of blend with the basses, and that got kind of cool. We'll talk about that when we get there. What's this guy? It's a kick. And it's like super quiet. Yeah, see this beginning of a loop. Well, there's a couple times. Instrumentally, we have this. So making these kind of like crystalline feeling plucky things inside Harmor is actually really easy. And we'll see when we talk about that in part 2, which I will do tomorrow. We'll do it tomorrow. It'll happen tomorrow. It'll come out. It'll be on time. It's gonna happen. I promise you that. And that's what that is. And there's this guy, which is the bass. It says Phase Warp 19, but it's not actually Phase Warp 19 anymore. It's its own thing. And we'll talk about what it's doing when we get there as well. And there's also a whole bunch of hats. I forget what's doing that. I'm pretty sure it's a gross beat. Yeah. So there's more than one way to tweak breaks. So this track, because Break Tweaker was meant to be the focus of it, is full of just a lot of little glitchy moments, and hence the glitchy nature of it. They're sort of, and it's also like at a breakbeat speed, 130 BPM. So it was a lot of fun with that. Now, what is this? It's an ARP, and that's probably what this guy is. This little. Yeah, that is. There's a lot of that goes on during the during some stuff. Now, what we just heard there, I think that was this guy. No, was the end of this guy? No, there's totally. I mean, that might. Oh, der. So there's a wave shaper fading in on top of the bell plucky thing. What said that distortion, the distorted reverb that we're hearing? That's what that is, and that's a lot cool. And now we're hearing the actual full-on drum beat come into play. So let's actually look at one of these loops inside Break Tweaker while we're here. So where's the play button on the whole thing, on this whole pattern? I don't really use Break Tweaker a lot. When I do, it's a lot of fun. There we go. So like stuff like this guy. Like that's the kind of stuff that I can do. And there is a lot of really, really cool stuff you could do inside it. Like you can change these divisions to be tones, like note values throughout here, and it's like different kinds of slopes and shapers and filters and whatever. Not only that, but here's the thing. You change the length of your pattern by doing that, right? The thing is, though, is that this pattern is now a length longer than the rest of them, and it will its time is independently tracked. So if I were to play... So you could actually, like, in terms of just beats that you would not have thought to do, just because why would you? You could do a lot of neat stuff like that. There are, as you can see, 24 patterns per thing, and you just there's always a lot of stuff you can do. And here's the main outputs here, because you can also like the way that I've done it is I've put the outputs as their own thing, so that the outs are going independently as opposed to just being one whole thing. So I can still mix it like it's regular, like loose samples, but they're being played in very strange ways. Like this guy. So that's what Break Tweaker is. Well, that's what I'm using it for. It can do a lot more than that. There's also a lot. Like I'm using all sample lines right now, but there's also synths that you can trigger with it, and there's a synth built into it, and it has a lot of really powerful shit attributed to it that I never really got into because I didn't. It's really, really, really dense. But it could be anything. I may or may not have made a video about Break Tweaker once upon a time, and if I haven't, I probably should, because it's a very interesting piece of thing. It's also, like, I keep mentioning, those AU5 samples and stuff that I keep using, and people are always like, how? Like, these guys. They're from Break Tweaker. When you get Break Tweaker, you get that sample pack that I'm using. And that's where that's from. So yeah, that's Break Tweaker. All the drums, the main drums anyway. There's and a lot of like loose sound effects are processed through Break Tweaker, and that's like the kind of the thing about this song. Except for this. This was just a sound. Now, it's interesting. This song, normally when I make songs, I start with a drop and I build everything around it. And something interesting happens when I don't do that, which is what happened in this song. This song I actually made chronologically. I made the intro, I made all these bits, I made all this stuff. Pretty much this whole section here I made before I made the drop. Which means that when I get to the drop, I don't have content ready for it. I don't have a lot of ideas about what I'm doing. And this means that I kind of need to like put something in there, but I don't quite know what. I kind of went a little forward with it when I got this part when we have this main bass here. Like that's the main bass. Is this the same sample? No, it's a different sample. Now, that's a sample that I did not make in this song. And what I was saying is that what ends up happening is that I end up just pulling samples out of like my drag loops section, that drag sample section, which is usually bass experiments from stuff that I never ended up using. I did that for Codename Hurricane too. You might remember that from a while back, where I didn't make the bass drop part first. I made the melodic part first, and then I had to like fill in the bass part. I didn't really have any ideas, so I just pulled random samples. And I did that for this song. The difference between that song and this song is that in this song, I actually still processed the sound. I had this sound, and I used the bandpass filter, which you're seeing here, and a whole bunch of other crap going on. And like that's all part of what makes this sound the sound. And I can still actually control the modulation and make it still fit with the rhythm in the song, as opposed to what I did with the Codename Hurricane, which was mostly rely on the sample just kind of fitting, which for the most part they did. So yeah, that's what that sound is. There's also like a lot of hits and things. There's there. And bass drops. You also heard a little bit of that tinge of distortion on top of the sound, and that's because of the mastering, which I am using two different Maximuses. I'm not totally sure why I did that. Although I must have, I have a Maximus on the bass itself, which means that it's probably doing a little bit of the heat. So that crunchiness we're hearing in the lead now, in the plucky lead, is because of that wavetable that came in over time. So in the beginning it was nice and clean, but now that kind of like fuzzy, almost bit crushed sound is from the wave shaper that we put on top of that. And then the ARP gets put in every once in a while and brought in, and then like there's not really, you see a whole lot of different patterns, but they're mostly just all the same stuff. It's the bass, the piano, and the ARP. What's this guy? This is a really big dude. It's probably a rise of some kind. Oh, it's a granulizer. The reason why we heard a lot of those things just now, even though I had that channel muted, like soloed, is because a lot of these are actually just in the master. They're just there. Yeah. So there's that going on. What's this guy? That's the filtered drums. That's what this pattern is. So we actually covered a lot of what's already in here. This is the main bass when it's in full swing, which is right here. Where is that? There's this extra guy here. Where you at? Yeah. That's that guy from earlier. And then there's this dude. Number 26. It's reversed. What's interesting about hearing, and part of the reason why I'm able to just kind of drag random samples out of previous experiments, is that because when I do them, they very rarely are what I want. They're not. Part of the reason why I never use them until like songs like these is because I was trying to do something specific, and then I tried to like that, and that was not what I wanted. But then like later, when I have a song like this, I just listen to it and it's like, what is that? That's dope. And this is just sort of a lesson in you keep stuff, you know, like having unfinished projects is not necessarily a bad thing. Having like failed experiments sitting around is not necessarily a bad thing, because what might be something that you don't want at the time might be something that's totally awesome later. Now that particular sound, like this, the sound design portion of this is going to be kind of difficult, because while there is a lot of neat sound design actually in the song, these things were done on stuff and projects that I don't even know about anymore. Although I can kind of infer how that was made, and I may or may not have actually made up how to base on that one, and a couple of these even. But I'll find out before then, and then we'll talk about that when we get to the sound design part, which is happening tomorrow. It is happening tomorrow. It's gonna happen. The other thing that's happening is these chords, which are muted, because I muted everything. This is really ridiculously simple. This is it's really, like, when we talk about this, you're gonna hate yourself if you can't figure out what this is. And I'm not saying that just because you're stupid. It's because there's a lot of stuff like this that the sound's kind of complicated when you first hear it, and then when you figure out what it is, even though there was no reason why you'd ever could know what it was, most of the time, when you do figure it out, it's just something like, oh my god, so much about what I learned in sound design is like that. It's just kind of like, of course it's that, of course it is, Jesus. So there's a lot of that going on, a lot of stuff like that. It's kind of sharp cutting around. So this guy, I think I included some of this in a sample pack in the How to Bass the basing pack. This is a granular channel, and I'm controlling various things. In this case, I'm controlling the stereo separation and the grain spacing. The stereo separation is cool because the way that it works in the granular stuff is that each individual grain is switched left and right. And then how hard you push it is how far it goes left and right. And if the grains are fast enough, it actually creates a pretty even stereo spread. You can kind of see that it gets really wide near the end there. Now, the actual sound that we're using, I forget. Is it going to tell us? Drag sample 118. So that's, I think, the main bass. Yep, that's this guy. I'm just granularizing it. And, like, the particular settings we'll discuss when it's the sound design part. But for the most part, when I do granular stuff, I'm not really paying attention to specifics in terms of what I'm actually automating. In this case, this is actually rather low in terms of, like, complexity. Because the only real granular parameter I'm messing with, actually, probably this one, is the grain spacing, as opposed to a whole bunch of other crap. And you might see that there's actually, like, drag sample 118 number 3, number 2, and number 4. Well, the difference between them is usually pitching. It's usually like I will either like time stretch it to make it longer or shorter, or then I'll pitch it to kind of fit whatever key I'm in, because I don't remember what note the original experiment that created that sound was, and it's got to be in key, so I just gotta make sure it's in key. You might notice that this song doesn't have a separate sub, and that's because around when I made this song, I wasn't really into doing separate subs. And even if I was, I would have had a really hard time doing that with this song, because, like I said, I don't know what notes these are, I don't know how they're following it, and the specifics about what they're doing are just lost to time, because I don't remember what project made them. I just don't know enough to make a separate sub. I could probably guess, I could do a pretty good job, but, like, the best jobs are the ones where the notes are doing precisely what they're supposed to be doing. So I relied on really heavy-handed, low-end compression. And we'll talk about that when we get to mixing and mastering, which is the third part, which is going to happen the day after tomorrow, which I think is Friday, so maybe not Friday. It'll probably happen, yeah. So tomorrow's Thursday. I'll do the sound design part Friday. This is Friday, so it's How to Bass Day. And Saturday, we'll see us do the part 3 of making up for this thing. Yeah, so, like, that's why I did have a separate sub. But you also might notice that it kind of doesn't matter, and that's for a lot of reasons that I'll tell you we'll discuss in the next part. Lots of hats, lots of weirdness, and that guy is just the lead blast in there. I don't think there's actually anything new in the song beyond that. Everything, sound like arrangement-wise, because pretty much everything that happens has already happened. Like this part. There is actually like a lot of stuff happening here that's interesting, so let's talk about this. So I think this is the lead part. That sounds like with the wave shaper. And then there's another one. That's just a lower version. I don't know if that's the same plugin or not. Usually when I have distorted elements like that, I try not to do chords with it, but I might have. Yep, it's totally just the same pattern, lower on the same thing. So that's what that is. This is a ride. There isn't a ride during the drop, so there's a ride during the middle bits. And that works. So I have the ARP, which is still just kind of doing its thing, and then I have the piano, which has always been there. And then I have this guy, which I like a lot. So here, this is the thing that you might have actually thought was probably a separate, like, almost choir-ish plugin happening on top of stuff. And it was not entirely intentional, but I did use it like that. I did sort of make it do that. Well, what I'm curious about now is how exactly I got it to sound bell-ish. I guess it's the Hertz mode, because it's a bit different. I guess the harmonizer did it too. And the low pass, there's that. It has a vague metallic feeling to it, which is usually a little bit of a result of the prism. I'm not using the prism, so it's a little bit weird. Oh, is it because I have the harmonizer after the filter? It is! Yeah! Awesome! I'll explain what that means during the sound design part. But it's times like these when I'm a little bit surprised about myself. And actually, this whole song, when I initially wrote it, was a big surprise to me. Because this actually started out as a very odd project for me. Not just because of just using Breaktrigger, but for a lot of stuff I'm not going to talk about, I wanted this to sound like something that wasn't the usual Seamless fare. I wanted it to be things that I don't normally do. So one of the things that I did was I made it hyper melodic, and I focused a lot on lead elements and like pads and chords and stuff. I mean, I do that a lot now, but back when this was made, this was a new thing for me. This was I had stopped being like ultra bass, and I was doing pretty shit and happy pretty shit even. So like that was a new frontier for me. And when I made like stuff like that pad that I made, like you don't really hear me a lot talking about making like sound designs for like leads and pads and stuff like that. And a lot of that is not because like I can't, it's because it's not really a part of my style. But I kind of surprised myself and then making something like that sounds that pretty, because I did make that in Harmor. So yeah, that was, and, for a lot of reasons, my initial plan about why I wanted this to not sound like me ended up falling, fairly miserably when we get to. Part of the reason why there's not, like, if you think about it, there's really not a lot happening in this song, but it does sound like it sounds like there's everything happening in this song. And that's because the particular nature of the sounds that I chose to use are ones that, even though they're the same sounds, they can sound wildly different from moment to moment. The individual basses, and even though like it's largely the same bass most of the time, and just the band passing and the craziness of it just sounds different constantly. The break tweaking patterns all sound weird and ridiculous. The chords and the weird Foley effects that put on top of stuff, it makes everything sound ultra dense and ultra ridiculous. Oh yes, the reverses. I did reverses. I almost never do this. In fact, I don't ever do this. This is the only time I ever done it. That's like a big super obvious inspiration for this track was a lot of what Cohen Sound stuff was. And like at the time, the Cohen Sound Asa EP was pretty new. I don't know if Dynasty had come out by then. I don't remember when I made this track, but that style is full of like reverses and reverse snares, reverse kicks, and whatever. I literally had never done that, and I decided, well, I probably should. Did I put any of the other drop? I did. So there's a lot of that going on. A lot of that. I'm probably missing details. Like, what is this? It's still piano. Yeah. So here's the big ending is just the pattern over and over again, and like the lead's still kind of going, and then there's the pad, and it all fades out, and then Eventually, it's just left with. Although while that's happening, there's So I had a big reverb on the lead, and then I put a gross beat on that. So when after it hit, it was just catching the reverb and doing it over and over again. And then I had a filter on top of all of that, so it was gradually fading out over the piano. That's what that was at the end there. Still the same sound though. Yeah, and that's more or less that. I don't know why this gigantic. Man, there's just a lot about this song that like. I made this a long time ago, and it's not just I'm forgetting about it. But even when I was putting it out on the RS Silent, it had been made for a long time before that. Just because it was for an entirely different thing, and then that thing fell through, and then I was like, whatever, cool, putting on this EP. So that it does have a lot of older tendencies in mine. Like you might notice that I had here's the drums, and I have stuff going on before the drums, and like what's up with that? And so it got. My arrangement had yet to really like cement itself into like what I'm doing in the mixer and that kind of thing. So this track has a lot of very interesting stuff going for it. Anyway, that's it for the arrangement. If you want to listen to the original all the way through, you can go to the link in the description where the original is linked. And tomorrow we'll see the sound design portion of this, which is still pretty interesting for like the stuff that is in here. And then I will try to explain what's going on in a lot of these recorded elements. If you have any questions about that, let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.